Welcome back to College Football Addiction. This is part 2 of a 3-part series where we're checking in with the big 3 in the state of Florida. We did the Gators first. Now we're on to Miami. We'll do Florida State last because of the way that they finished the 2024 season. Really had struggles there. Now, the 2024 season for Miami, we haven't really talked about Miami much since the bowl game. But the 2024 season, if we put everything into perspective, was a massive step forward for the Canes. Year 1 under Mario, they finished under 500 in a very disappointed year, getting blown out by their biggest rival, losing to Middle Tennessee State, and just having an awful, awful year. In 2023, we saw a slight step up to where they did make a bowl game, and though they lost that game, they finished above 500, had a pretty bad finish to the year, which we'll talk about more in just a moment. But it was a massive step forward in 2024. Right. And we'll talk about the finish in a moment. But if I'd have just told you that they were going to be a 10-win team, they were going to just barely miss the ACC championship, and that they would be right on the outside looking in of the playoff, you'd have been maybe a little bit disappointed with not making the playoff. But if I'd have told you that Mario was going to get them to a 10-win team in year 3 when he started, you'd have probably taken that. Now, a disappointing finish cannot be ignored for Miami in 2024. And that is becoming a theme with Mario Cristobal in South Florida. In 2022, they went 1-3 in November. In 23, they went 1-3 in November, lost their bowl game, and went 1-4 down the stretch. In 24, more of the same. They did go 2-2 in November, but again, lost their bowl game to go 2-3 down the stretch. In November, at Miami, Mario Cristobal has been 4-8, 4-10 with the bowls. And I understand excuses for both of them. Van Dyke hurt in one, Ward not playing the second half in the second, but it still was Rutgers and Iowa State. Still games they probably should win. That has to get better. Finishing has to get better. And it's the most important thing to me for Mario Cristobal. Now, the ACC schedule comes out tonight, and so we'll see what November looks like for them. Maybe we'll do a recap of ACC schedules in another video, so if you're not already, make sure you hit that subscribe button. But no matter who they play in November this year, that has to get better. And the Canes have to stop falling apart at the end of the season. In 2023, they were 6-2 and really should have been 7-1 had Mario not made the mistake of not kneeling the ball. But then they finished the year just absolutely falling off. Now, I understand injuries. I understand reasons, but that has to get better. I'm not sure what happens to them later in the year, but it's been pretty weird to witness. But looking at 2025, they're getting some early hype. Again, they're in a lot of people's top 15. Most people have them in their top 20. Anybody that has Miami 20 or later seems to be a little bit off. And they're even in some top 10 lists. Is that reasonable? Should their hype be that high? Well, I don't have a great answer for you. We'll find out on the field, but win totals will come out soon. And when they do, make sure you're betting on those win totals over at BetUS. You get a 150% sign-up bonus at BetUS when you use their code YouTube150. That's on your first deposit. Your next 2 deposits will be 125% each, all that up to $2,000. Use code YouTube150. To get there, to get to that win total, which I've seen on different sites at around 8.5, 9, adding Carson Beck was a big deal. And we can wonder about it. We can ask a lot of questions about it. But to me, adding Carson Beck took them from a 6 or 7 win team to a 9 or 10 win team, most likely. Could they excel? Could they get to 11? Could they fall just beneath that and get to 8? I don't really see a situation where they go under 8 wins in 2025. But without Carson Beck, without that answer there, they could have been a 6-win team. Maybe worse if things don't pan out the way you would want. Their running game, their offensive line should still be very, very strong. Big question is wide receiver. They've got some young guys. They brought in CJ Daniels. I like him a ton. I went to Liberty. I've watched all of his games there. At LSU, a little bit down in production, but they obviously have a factory of wide receivers there. And then you've got young guys like Trader and Carr. What do they get out of them? The front 7 on defense, still really good. And a lot of new pieces in the secondary. I mean, shoot, look at this secondary. They will undoubtedly be better than what they were. These guys graded out very, very well. how does it all fit together? On paper, it seems like Miami has certainly upgraded on defense, especially in that secondary. Corey Heatherman, hired from Minnesota. How does that hire work out? Big time question for me. I think he's a good defensive coordinator. Minnesota in the Big Ten has always had really good defenses. Obviously, that brand of football plays defense and seems to care about it more than most other places in the country. But what kind of time does it take for him to get his system in place? He's got to get out the gate running. They play Notre Dame week 1. They play Florida quickly after that. They play Florida State on the road right after that. And they've got a lot of big games early in the year that will dictate how their season goes. Big questions for Miami. How much of a drop-off is it from Cam Ward to Carson Beck? Now, this is not a shot at Beck. This is not a shot at them bringing him in. I don't have a hot take on that. But you do realize that Carson Beck probably isn't going to play to the level of Cam Ward, right? I don't think I'm breaking any news by telling you that. I think I can be pretty fair and on one hand admit that Beck raises their floor from 6 wins to 8 wins, their ceiling from 7 wins to 10 or more, and at the same time realize that it is very hard to replace a Cam Ward, even with a Carson Beck, who was a little bit off this year. How much of that has to do with the receivers? How much of that has to do with the offensive line? Probably a mix of both him regressing some and then the pieces around him not being as elite as they were before. What about defensive improvement? This is probably the biggest question to me about Miami. If their defense doesn't improve, which I think it will, right? This is not me telling you I don't think it will. If his defense doesn't improve under Heatherman, I think that they're in a lot of trouble. How much time does it take to adjust? I mentioned Notre Dame and Florida in the first month, Florida State right after that. We'll find out more about the schedule tonight. But it's a huge question mark still for me with that defense. How do those pieces in the secondary work together? How does that all fit? How does it function? It looks good on paper. And we knew going into the year that Miami's secondary was going to be a question mark, and it lived up to being that. But how does it look when it's all kind of on and out in front of us? Talking about the schedule, I think the schedule is so much tougher this year than it was last year. Notre Dame and Florida, both at home. Good for Miami that those are at home. I think good for Miami that those are early in the year. What's Notre Dame got at quarterback? How does UF start the year? They've been pretty bad starting the year under Napier at times. Got to go to SMU. Got to go to Virginia Tech. I don't expect Virginia Tech to be great, but that's always a tough place to play. Got to play Syracuse again. Obviously, they'll have a new quarterback as well, but that won't be an easy game. At FSU, who the heck knows what FSU is going to look like this year? I would anticipate they get more than 2 wins, but can they get to 6, 7, 8? I don't know. It's tough to really project what Florida State's going to look like. We'll know a lot more about them through their first month of the year. They obviously open up with Bama, and then they play a couple of cupcakes before they take on UVA. Florida State could very well be 3-1. With Miami coming to town. And if Miami has beaten Florida and Notre Dame, they'll be a top 5 team. We could be looking at game day going to Tallahassee that week. Who knows? What about Louisville? Louisville, always a tough out. Got to go on the road at Pitt. You'd probably rather play Pitt later in the year as they seem to combust late in the season every year, not dissimilarly to Miami. Now, right now, when you talk about the preseason hype, when you talk about where Miami is, it is late January, the 27th. Today, as I record this, I'm telling you, I'd have Miami between 8 and 10 wins. I'd have them probably right now at 9 wins until I see how the defensive coordinator can adjust and get things rolling, until I see how Beck plays coming off the injury and what the drop-off is from Beck to Ward, and then whether or not they can pick up an elite wide receiver maybe in the spring portal. Maybe pull another Lucas and just have a guy unenroll and jump into the portal and re-enroll at Miami. Until I see that, those are my questions about Miami. But as of today, I'd have them winning more games than anybody else in the state of Florida. I'd have them the best team winning against both their rivals in the state of Florida. I'm not sure that I have them beating Notre Dame just yet. I'm not sure that I have them winning the ACC just yet. I think Clemson will be very, very tough. But I would expect, as of today, Miami to be in that ACC championship. I would expect them to be around 9 or so wins, maybe 10 if they can overachieve just a little bit. And I think that when we're in November next year, we will be having conversations like we did in 2024 about Miami being a playoff team. The biggest question of all these things, and maybe I've said that too many times, the biggest question of all these things is how they finish in November. How do they finish down the stretch? Because I think their tougher games are early. We'll see what the ACC schedule looks like, but playing a national champion contender in Notre Dame week 1 early. Florida, a team that finished pretty hot early. Florida State, your biggest in-conference rival, early. There's really no excuses for Mario to go 2-2 or 1-3 down the stretch again in November. He's got to be better there. The team has to be better there. I don't know if it's a lack of focus. I don't know what the situation is, but I would anticipate they'll be better if the schedule sets up pretty friendly for them late down the stretch. Let me know your thoughts, Canes fans, who have actually enjoyed talking about Miami because we don't do a lot of trolling. We don't do a lot of making fun. We just kind of try and share our thoughts. But on a Big 3 check-in, I'd have Miami still first in the state in 2025. Let me know your thoughts down below. If you want to see the Florida video that I did, some thoughts on what their season might look like, you can click the link on the screen right now to check it out. Appreciate BetUS for their support. We'll talk to you soon here on College Football Addiction.